For almost 200 years, one question about the saber-toothed cat had no answer that anyone could check. Not what it ate, not where it lived, not when it disappeared. What it looked like. Every image of the animal that has ever existed, every museum mount, every textbook plate, every frame of every documentary ever made about the Ice Age was a reconstruction. An informed guess built outward from bone by people who had never seen the animal and never expected to. In the autumn of 2020, in the far northeast of Siberia, diggers working a riverbank for mammoth ivory cut into a block of ice. And the guessing stopped. What came out of that ice was not a skeleton, it was a body. Head, shoulders, forelimbs, fur still attached, whiskers still set in the upper lip, claws still on the toes. The animal had been about 3 weeks old when it died. It had been in the ground for something over 35,000 years. And when a team of Russian paleontologists finally published a description of it, 4 years later in the journal Scientific Reports, the paper contained several details that no reconstruction had ever predicted. One of them was on the underside of its foot. Before going any further, one thing has to be stated plainly, because the coverage around this find did not always state it. No genome was recovered from this cub. Nothing about the animal's identity in that paper rests on DNA. The identification is anatomical. The shape of the jaw, the structure of the teeth still sitting unerupted in their sockets, read off a computed tomography scan. The genus has been sequenced once. In 2017, a team led by Johanna Peimans published a mitochondrial genome recovered from a Homotherium jawbone dredged out of the North Sea, and that result reorganized the family. It showed that the saber-toothed cats of late Pleistocene North America and the ones from Europe were the same animal, and the American name was retired. But that was a different specimen on a different continent 20 years earlier. The Siberian cub has not been sequenced. Alexei Lopatin, who led the study and directs the Borisiak Paleontological Institute in Moscow, has said that extracting DNA from it is a next step, not a finished one. So what follows is not a genetic story. It is something rarer than that. It is a description of an extinct animal taken from the animal itself. The find came from the Abyysky district of the Republic of Sakha in Yakutia, a territory in Russia's far northeast that is, for these purposes, the most productive place on Earth. The site sits on the Badyarika River, a right tributary of the Indigirka, in the flat, waterlogged lowland between the Yana and the Indigirka. The ground there is called Yadoma. It is a deposit of silt and ice laid down through the last glacial period and frozen ever since, and it is packed with the bones of the mammoth fauna. Mammoth, bison, horse, woolly rhinoceros, cave lion. Prospectors work the eroding riverbanks looking for tusks, which are legal to collect and valuable to sell. And in the course of that work, they occasionally find something else. In 2020, they found a lump of ice with a carcass in it. The front half of an animal was preserved almost intact. The head, the neck, the chest back to roughly the 12th vertebra, and both forelimbs. A second section of the same block held the hip bones, still articulated with the thigh and shin bones. The rest was gone. The specimen went to the Department for the Study of Mammoth Fauna in Yakutsk, where it is still held, catalogued as MET-21. The study itself was carried out in Moscow. Radiocarbon dating was run on the animal's wool at the Accelerator Mass Spectrometry facility in Novosibirsk. The raw measurement came back at 31,808 years, plus or minus 367. Calibrated, that places the death of this cub between roughly 35 and 37,000 years ago. It was alive during the last glacial period, on a landscape that no longer exists, in a fauna that is entirely gone. If you're finding this useful, subscribing helps more of this reach people who care about getting it right. To understand why the paper mattered, It helps to understand what paleontologists had been working with before it. Homotherium latidens was named in 1846 by the English anatomist Richard Owen, from teeth. For most of the time since, that is essentially what the animal has been: teeth, jaws, and scattered postcranial bone from sites across Eurasia, Africa, and the Americas. It was a large cat, roughly lion-sized, with a short back, long legs, and flattened, serrated upper canines that in an adult could reach something close to 20 centimeters. From that skeleton, several generations of researchers reconstructed a face. This was careful work, not guesswork. Muscles leave marks on bone, ridges where they attach, hollows where they sit. And from those marks, it is possible to rebuild a musculature and then drape it. Maurizio Anton and Angel Galobart published on the neck of this animal in 1999, arguing from bone architecture that it carried an unusually heavy set of neck muscles. Anton and colleagues, including Manuel Salesa, published a full soft tissue reconstruction in 2009, and revisited the face again in 2022 in a paper about how the saber teeth were covered when the mouth was closed. But there is a limit built into all of it, and everyone working on the problem knew exactly what it was. You can reconstruct a mammoth with some confidence because there are elephants. You can reconstruct a cave lion because there are lions. Every reconstruction leans on a living relative to fill in the parts the bones don't record: the ears, the lips, the pads, the coat. There is no living saber-toothed cat. There has not been one for around 10,000 years. For the soft parts of this animal, there was nothing to lean on at all. So the reconstructions filled those gaps with the closest available stand-in: a big cat. And that, it turns out, is where they went wrong. The Moscow team took a straightforward approach. They put the mummy through a medical CT scanner, built a three-dimensional model of the skull from the slices, and then compared the animal, point by point, against a carcass of a modern lion cub of the same developmental age, 3 weeks old, judged by which milk teeth had broken through the gum. The identification came from the lower jaw. Homotherium has a distinctive mandible, a pronounced bony flange hanging below the front of the jaw, a low, stubby coronoid process at the back, a deep chin region, and an incisor row set high above the cheek teeth. All 4 features were there in the scan, in an animal whose teeth had barely erupted. Then they looked at the outside, and the differences from the lion cub started stacking up. The ears were small, low, and set high on the skull, semicircular arches barely clearing the outline of the head, sitting level with the upper teeth. On the lion cub, the ears stand out from the head and sit far lower. Measured, the mummy's ear was 3.5 times wider than it was tall. The mouth was wider. Measured corner to corner, the opening was about 15% larger than the lion cub's, an adaptation for gape in an animal that would eventually need to open its jaws around 2 20-centimeter blades. The upper lip was more than twice as deep. At 3 weeks old, this cub was already building the tissue that would one day sheath teeth it did not live long enough to grow. The neck was longer and more than twice as thick, not from bone, but from muscle. That one was a confirmation. It is precisely what the myological reconstructions of adults had predicted, and here it was, in soft tissue, in a 3-week-old. The forelimbs were between 18 and 23% longer than the lion cubs, in an animal whose preserved body length was around 10% shorter. And the coat was short, thick, soft, and dark brown, with hair between 20 and 30 millimeters long, longer over the back and neck than down the legs. Then they turned the paw over. Here is the finding, and it is a small one in the sense that it would fit in your palm. The front paw of this cub is nearly as wide as it is long. A lion cub's front paw is narrow and elongated. The pads on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th toes are close to square, where a lion's are oval. The main pad behind them is broad and bean-shaped. And the carpal pad, the small pad set back on the wrist, which every living cat has, and which acts as a brake and a shock absorber, is not there. Not damaged, not lost in preservation. Absent. The paper reads these features together as adaptations to cold and to deep snow. A broad foot to spread weight, squared pads for grip, and one less patch of bare skin exposed to the ground. Jack Seng, a paleontologist at Berkeley who studies the anatomy of extinct mammals and had no involvement in the study, pointed out that the shape of that paw is closer to a bear's than a cat's, and that this matters for a question the field has been circling for years. Saber teeth are precision instruments. They break. The long-running suspicion has been that the rest of the body had to hold prey completely still before the teeth were used at all, and that the forelimbs did that work. This paw does not settle that question. It does something more useful. It puts a real measurement into an argument that had been running on models. Because that is the actual payoff here, and it is bigger than one cub. Everything on that list, the low ears, the wide mouth, the deep lip, the snowshoe foot with a pad missing, was invisible in bone. Not one of those features could have been inferred from a skeleton, and none of them appeared in any reconstruction, because the only way to guess them was to look at a living cat, and looking at a living cat gives the wrong answer. The animal was not a lion with longer teeth. It was something with no counterpart in the modern world, and the study says so directly. This is the first time in the history of paleontology that the appearance of an extinct mammal with no living analog has been described from the animal itself. There is one more thing in the paper, and it has nothing to do with anatomy. For a long time, the assumption was that Homotherium vanished from Eurasia during the Middle Pleistocene, hundreds of thousands of years before this cub was born. That assumption came apart in 2003, when Jelle Rumer and colleagues described a Homotherium jawbone trawled from the floor of the North Sea and dated it to roughly 28,000 years. One specimen, one date, and a very long gap in the record on either side of it. The Bajarica cub is the second. It is also the first ever described from Asia. So the range of this animal in the late Pleistocene now runs from the North Sea to northeastern Siberia, and the case that it was a rare relic hanging on in one corner of Europe is considerably weaker than it was. 2 points do not make a distribution, but they make a much larger map than 1 point did. What remains true about this specimen, when the significance is stripped off it, is fairly ordinary. It was 3 weeks old. Its adult teeth were still forming in the bone, and its milk teeth had only just started to show. It was smaller than a lion cub of the same age, and its arms were longer. Its coat was soft. It could not have hunted anything, and it was almost certainly still with its mother when it died. How it died, nobody knows. The paper does not speculate, and neither will I. There is no injury described, no illness identified, and no evidence either way. What is known is that it ended up somewhere that froze around it, and stayed frozen for 35,000 years, through the end of an ice age and the whole of human history since, which is the only reason anyone alive has ever seen the face of this animal. And the cub itself has more to give. The full anatomy is still being worked through, the DNA has not been read yet, and the adult animal, the one everybody actually pictures, is still, for now, an extrapolation from a 3-week-old.